Welcome back to the dispatch. Very excited to have the one and only Steve Crothers from tractordrawnaerials.com. What's going on, Steve?
Dan, good to see you. That was very kind of you, but it's great to finally be here in the studio. This is pretty nice. I think this is done. You guys done a great job here.
I like that you call it the studio. It's actually our boardroom. So they kind of get to do a little bit of both. I don't know if you noticed that there's actually aerial legs on this very table.
I did. That's pretty impressive.
That was probably like a must for you.
Yeah, that was pretty cool.
Yeah. Could you imagine if we would have set this up before you came in here and we had this thing like jackknifed? Like the table was set up like a
I'm
tiller?
I'm thinking fire departments would love to have these jacks as their table stands.
Yeah.
Because I mean, just some amazing customized tables in
Yeah.
the firehouses. So that would be an awesome addition to it.
All right, very good. So let me talk to you a little bit about what is the purpose of a tractor drawn aerial?
Yeah, I feel very fortunate and honored that I get to stay in this, discipline specifically over the years. To answer that question, I think simply it's a straight stick aerial. It just happens to bend in the middle and it has somebody at the back that can independently steer the back of the trailer, which makes it give it a lot more options, if you will. But there's so many capabilities of this apparatus that a lot of people don't really realize or are aware of what it can do. And when you think historically, this apparatus has been known for the big city. The big city's got these rigs. And so you are now seeing smaller departments look at this apparatus and ask the question like, hey, is this for us? Should we do this? And when they understand all the elements that this apparatus can provide and give, it really starts to change their thinking. And that's what's cool about this apparatus because it's essentially an aerial, a straight stick, but it's giving you a lot of different components that you don't get with the straight stick or a mid-mount.
Yeah, so tell me a little bit more about those capabilities that are offered from a TDA.
Well, obviously, everybody's aware of how maneuverable it is. We're talking about a very long apparatus that can get places that other apparatus cannot simply get. And when you're talking about the high density buildings happening in all of our communities, this apparatus is able to have no problem navigating in and out of these, areas. So maneuverability is by far one of the top ones. And then the next big one is compartmentation. You're talking about a massive payload that you're bringing to the fire ground through all that equipment on that trailer. And typically, I've said this before, but a straight frame is anywhere from 100 and 150 cubic feet of storage space versus you jump into a tiller. Now you're looking at 600 cubic feet of, apparatus that you can use for equipment. And it's just a huge payload that you're bringing to the fire ground. So those two things are pretty significant. And then you think about smaller things that people don't really think about, which is when you talk about setup time, you're talking about 2 outriggers. There are 2 outriggers on this apparatus. So you don't have 6 or 4. So you're talking about very quick setup, as well as overall footprint. Even though it's long, it's not going to be as wide because you're only having 2 outriggers. So it makes it very easy to get in and out of places. And then people don't think about ergonomics. As a firefighter, as I'm going to operate off this apparatus, I'm able to get to my equipment from my waist to my shoulder height. So I'm not reaching up high. If I'm maybe not as tall, I'm not going to be able to get up there. And when I open up the compartmentation, I'm accessing my equipment very quickly. I don't have to take 2 or 3 pieces of equipment out to get to that piece of equipment. So I'm much quicker in getting access to my equipment. And then I don't have to go up on top of the apparatus and say, raise the aerial up to get equipment out from under the aerial and then hand it down to another firefighter, taking 2 different firefighters. Another one would be ladder trucks should be bringing ground ladders to the fire scene. And this apparatus can just bring a massive amount of ground ladders to the fire scene, depending on how you're going to configure it. I've seen apparatus up to 370, 380 feet of ground ladders going to be coming to the fire ground. That's based on how you spec it out, but you may be very specific that you need a lot of ground ladders. And so this apparatus gives you that. And that's huge, being able to bring that among other elements that you might need to be as well. So a lot of different variations there, depending on what your needs are.
Yeah. Tell me about some calls that you've been on where you thought, man, I'm glad that I have a tiller, or that it was really unique to being a tiller apparatus in that situation.
Yeah, well, I would say every call I go on. I had the opportunity to operate on rear mount sticks before I was into a tiller rig. And so I know what it's like to operate off of those. And I always tell the joke, like when I come to the firehouse and if my tiller was out for repair and we had a spare they would put a spare rear mount into the fire station. And when I would see that, I would literally want to drive home because I was like, because I knew what it was going to be like for that 24 hours working with that rig versus the tiller rig. But to your question, it really, I think when you think about the capability of getting to the fire scene, and let's say you had like a big warehouse fire and the incident commander needs a stick on the Charlie side of the building. With a TDA, you can get around to the Charlie side where perhaps other apparatus could not get to the Charlie side. And that's because we're able to bend that apparatus around the corner. And essentially, there are techniques that we use, such as walk the trailer. So I can basically take the trailer and I can walk it around the corner with this technique that we use and get it to the Charlie side where a straight stick could not get to that same exact location. So that's huge operationally from that standpoint. And, when you're operating that and, someone's like, hey, we can't get a stick over there. I'm like, yeah, we can do it. That's huge when you see that happen. Or you come into a fire ground and say like you're the third apparatus on scene. And so it's cluttered already, but we need to get to the front of the building. With this apparatus, even though it's very long, we're able to just meander right in there and going around apparatus in very tight clearance situations, no problem, able to do that. And to be able to get all of my equipment up front, even though I had to get around all that apparatus, gives us operational superiority, and that becomes huge. And then reverse it, right? Time to leave. And the scene is cluttered with fire apparatuses. You're always getting something like, hey, I'll move my engine, or the chief's like, I'll move my chief's buggy, or even a police officer's like, hey, let me move the police car. Like, nope, don't worry about it. And now we back out and they watch this thing snake and you watch the cop's eyes bug out like whoa. And you're like, oh, no problem. So yeah. And so it's when you see that happen, and that's again, just the maneuverability. But then when I think about like operational, like what does this rig do for us operationally? I remember like coming into an apartment complex that was a 8-story ordinary construction building. And we basically took the turntable and we were able to push it closer to the building in this very tight area. And by doing that, we were able to put the turntable under power lines. So what we've done essentially is we're taking the power lines completely out of play because of the ability to push the turntable closer to that. And so your telecom wires, your service wires, your transformer, your high transmission lines completely out. Because if I were to stay out on the street, now I'm thinking I have to put my aerial through those lines, or maybe I can't, depending on what I've got. Here, because we're very intentional about pushing the turntable closer, and it's all about that fifth wheel. Like for us, the fifth wheel is the center of the universe for a TDA. Where we put that fifth wheel is where the turntable goes. And so placement of that turntable is essential anytime you're going to spot an aerial. And now I can be very, very specific and intentional about that. With the driver and the tiller operator being able to wedge the fifth wheel closer, we got under the power lines. Now, what did that give us? Basically, what I'm able to do now is I'm able to take that aerial and I'm able to scrub the entire A side of the building. So now my rescue profile is the best it's going to be and get every single window on the A side. Because we positioned on the Bravo Alpha corner, now I'm able to get my aerial on all the windows on the Bravo side of that. And this particular building had a fire escape. And when you're throwing an aerial to a fire escape, there's specific things you can do that when you throw that aerial to the fire escape, you can line it up in a certain way that as you are getting off of or transition off the aerial onto the fire escape, it's literally step by step. And it's just this easy transition. And when you understand how to throw an aerial that capacity, that gives me that. Or let's just say I had victims need to be removed off that, or firefighter egress or access to that. And then on top of that, I was also able to go to the roof. And so we can put firefighters to the roof. So by that single move and being very intentional, we got all those operational opportunities to do that. The other thing that people don't think about, and this is a bit nuanced, is as my tractor pushes in, and as we come into the scene, my tiller operator is going to kick out. What that does is most people may not realize, but the outriggers are on the trailer, not on the tractor. And so if my trailer kicks out, then my outriggers are going to kick out away from your curb or away from your grass. Well, when I put our outriggers out and down, I'm basically putting them down on the street and I'm not having to worry about, do I have suitable ground to put them down on? So when you see what the rig can do in that capacity from an operational standpoint and enhance my ability, it's huge. It's huge.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit how a community decides that a tiller is right for them?
It's a great question. I think historically, you've seen tillers come back, make a resurgence back in the National Fire Service, and obviously they're a very cool apparatus. It's a cool thing, and I always try to caution people like this is not why you buy a tiller just because it's cool, right? Although it's an awesome apparatus, but we really have to look at what are your operational needs as a department. Why are you needing to do that? And that's the first question I ask, and we really kind of dive down into that, lean into like what is the purpose and why would you be thinking about that? And that starts to answer some questions that leads to some other questions that we have as well. But what you're seeing now is most departments that are purchasing tillers for the first time, never had them before, are smaller jurisdictions. There's always been the big city, but now we're talking about smaller jurisdictions. Now, why would they do that? Because they're looking at this apparatus, and I always say this apparatus is very modular. So what are your needs? And you can configure it really uniquely because you have tractor, trailer, and tiller cab. And that allows you to kind of move and do different things based on your needs. But let's just say, for example, a department has a heavy rescue in their station and they have a straight frame ladder truck. And the way they respond is they're going to respond with that ladder truck. But if they get a heavy rescue response, they're going to come back and get that heavy rescue. Well, we can take with a tiller, we can combine those two apparatus into one apparatus, which is done all the time. And literally you can get all the equipment and put it on the tiller as well as all your truck on that as well. So now you're combining equipment. Or let's just say, for example, you need to have an engine, a heavy rescue, and a truck company, 3 combined into one. What that gives you is one, you're purchasing one apparatus. And then let's just think of the longevity of that apparatus. Maintenance costs on 1 versus 3. It's pretty significant when you're talking about the citizens trying to save money or try to conserve what they need to in regards to financial restrictions they may have. So that allows people to really think about, okay, what can I do with this apparatus? And again, as I talked earlier with the high density that's coming into almost every community, it just allows us to be very maneuverable and get around different things.
Yeah. So if a customer's trying to get the most out of this, or a fire department or a municipality is trying to get the most out of their truck, what kind of customizations or design elements do they need to be considering as they're going through and building this truck out?
Well, there's a lot. There's a lot to this apparatus in regards to all the different nuances to this. So it's answering those questions. What are you using it for? If I'm going to be having heavy rescue combined with the truck company, then we're probably going to add more compartmentation. So if I'm adding more compartmentation, now my sight lines for my tiller operator kind of get reduced. So what can we do to augment that? We've got cameras. Where do we put those cameras? How do you use those? So I always say there's a cause and effect with the decisions you're making. Like I'm going to get this particular element on the apparatus, but it's going to affect 3 other things in that particular region of the trailer or the back of the rig. And so understanding what those are become really important. And that's kind of what I do is really dive in and communicate and make sure they have an understanding of that. But let's just say, example, they need to have a pump on the tractor. Well, now that's going to affect the distance between the front wheel and the back wheel of that tractor. We want to kind of keep that reduced, not getting long. So there's different things we can do for that. But we're going to need to put hose on there. So that may change the compartmentation on the trailer because now you have to have some LDH on that trailer. Where does it go? What kind of compartmentation? Specialized things you can do. So as you work through kind of answering those questions, it starts to reveal kind of what the rig is going to get into. Or like I said before, you want lots of ground ladders. Well, you're going to not have as many compartments because you'll have some exterior ground ladders as well as in the ladder tunnel.
Okay. So talk to me more about maneuverability. You talked about, hey, when I'd show up and the tiller was out of service, getting maintenance done on it or whatever the case was, your heart sank a little bit. Lost a little pep in the step, so to say. But what's different there? Talk to me about comparing those 2 different types of aerials.
Well, if I was going to work with the straight stick that day, I knew now I'm doing 2-point, 3-point turns on a turn I would never have to do that, where the truck would just slide through or around the corner with ease. And when you have a good team, a driver tiller operator, and you understand how this rig should operate, they work in conjunction with each other, and they're able to be extremely maneuverable in areas that you would never assume a rig this size could get in and out of. So think about coming into an emergency scene where you have a car accident. That apparatus can be used to bend itself around the scene to protect the scene. And so you're doing 2 things there. One, you're protecting the scene from outside cars potentially. And also you're getting your equipment closer because when you bend that apparatus around that, your equipment becomes closer to the scene. And so you're not going a far distance to get equipment and so forth. So that's somewhere where you become very maneuverable in how you're going to move that apparatus into the scene. Like you could respond in, and now we're going to be very intentional about grabbing that trailer over here and bringing the tractor over here, or we may back it in depending on what the situation provides for. So that's where you see the maneuverability. And I think it really happens or starts at that fifth wheel because that's where it's going to bend. Everybody thinks it's about the tiller operator, and I would say absolutely. But because it bends in the middle, this is the bendy truck of the National Fire Service. And then with our tiller operator in the back, we're able to actually independently take the back of the trailer and move it in whatever direction we want to. And when we go around a corner that's extremely tight, right, our tiller operator may want to look to the inside, but there's no need for them to look to the inside because our driver is going to see that from their mirror. So where should the tiller operator look? To the outside. Then what do? They steer the back of the trailer away from the inside, thus opening up the inside. And so those are things that we teach and get people to understand that's your job. That's what you're going to do in that situation. This is very tight, but no problem. We made it.
What kind of considerations go into a pump being on a tiller?
Yeah. So, there's many departments in the old days to put a pump on a tiller was taboo. You would never do it. Like that's not even thought of. Why get a tiller in that situation? But now with the advancements of apparatus and where you guys have really made this apparatus much more maneuverable with the cramp angles on the tractor tires and the tiller tires, this rig is extremely maneuverable. And so we're not as worried as we used to be about putting a pump on the tractor. Of course, if it's a true truck, you're not going to have a pump. But if you have to have one because your jurisdiction needs suppression, then there's no problem putting a pump on the tractor now. When that happens, we need to start thinking about, we don't want to make that tractor get very long. What we can do is shorten up the trailer and if the tractor gets a little longer. So there's different things you can do as far as compartmentation on the trailer, but keep the overall rig a certain size. And we want to protect that distance between the front axle on the tractor and the back axle on the tractor. So when we're talking about a pump on the tractor, you start asking the questions, what type of pump do you need? Are you trying to meet ISO ratings, right? You're going to need the 1500 GPM and the 300-gallon tank. If you need that, then we now know what that tank is. It is the size it is. But if you don't need to meet ISO, then we can start thinking about making that pump panel smaller to reduce the overall length of that distance between the front and back axle of the tractor. So those are some creative things you can do. Do you need as big as a tank on that pump is, 300 gallons? Can we reduce that down? You're going to get a water supply, so you don't need such a big tank. Do you need cross lays? So different things we can do to kind of look at what type of pump do you need. But what I've seen and what's significant is how putting a pump on a tractor has not changed or reduced the maneuverability of a TDA. What I would say was 2 rigs equal, other than one has a pump and one doesn't. What you're going to see is both will be able to get around the corner. Just one's going to get around the corner easier. That's all the difference. The other one may have to slow down a little more to get around that corner because it's a little tighter versus the one didn't before. And I've been fascinated over the years to see, Pierce, the way you've manufactured this apparatus to become very maneuverable with the tack force suspension or your cramp angles, where you really see this rig bend around corners with ease. And that's a real benefit. So I'm not as against putting a pump on the tractor. We just need to really look at protecting that overall length. And there's just different things we can do when we're playing around with that.
Yeah, I know that is like an emotional topic, right?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I was lucky in Seattle where we had true trucks, no pumps on there. But in my capacity now, helping departments spec out rigs is very normal to have that conversation. And I'm not as heartbroken about it as I used to be. And again, I know kind of things we can do to kind of help out, making sure we maintain that overall maneuverability. So I think it's great.
Yeah. Now, in that similar vein of kind of the advancement of tillers, you're seeing them, you mentioned it like in smaller areas, smaller municipalities, but the popularity has certainly grown across the country. Are there other things that you'd credit that to?
Well, the internet. I mean,
Yeah.
the internet changed everything. In the old days, this was what was interesting. If you wanted to learn about a TDA, where were you going to learn that information? There was nothing on the internet about it. The only place you could find out about a TDA was go to the big city who had one, your local fire department closest to you, or you go to the manufacturer. Problem with the manufacturer was they weren't going to tell you how to use it. They're just going to how to build it. That's it, right? So there really wasn't a lot of information about it. And so I started the website tractordrawnail.com, which was a place just to celebrate these, right? To celebrate them because they were making this resurgence and there wasn't a place to do that. And a place for people to land to start like asking questions and getting answers to like, well, why would we do this? What are the pros and cons of that? There was a lot of misnomers out there about the TDA, and that's changed. And then probably the number one thing that has impacted this is one TDA in a region will change everything for that region. Give an example. In 2016 in Texas, massive state, there was only one department that had TDAs. Dallas Fire Department had TDAs. And then Irving, which is just south of Dallas, they get their first tiller. And that started a chain reaction where within 6 years, you have, I think there's like 15 tillers in all of Texas, and it just keeps going and going. And so what I have said is when you get a tiller with a department that is in a region that doesn't have them, you will watch within the next year or 2 years, people will really start asking that question, well, why do they have the tiller? What are they doing? They don't need one. And that's always the thing. They don't need one. They think it's this big city truck and they don't understand all of the components it can do to really help with that. And as they see it operate in, like I said before, generally smaller jurisdictions, right? Smaller departments that are getting them because of the use and the capacity of them being very modular. And they start asking that question, and then you just start seeing them come and go, and it's just launched. That's been fun for me to be part of this, be in this seat, getting to be in this discipline and spend time here, really trying to help people understand about that and learn about it.
Yeah, and the growth's been interesting. Like when we take customers through our plant and they see the bays that are the tillers are being manufactured in, one of the things I typically tell customers as well is that you are looking at in these couple of bays more tillers than there are in service in the state of Wisconsin. Because I think there's one in
Yeah,
is it Madison? Yeah, like so one in service in Wisconsin. There's more under the roof right now at Pierce than there are in service, and it's just so. Like, any thoughts on that regionality element and on why you see it in certain regions other than others?
I think it's simply because people don't understand it. And there's a little misnomer, and you see departments like, wait, there's a driver in the front and a driver in the back. That's crazy. I can't even get my drivers to drive normal with the straight stick. So they're like, how am I going to get two guys to do it at the same time? So there's a bit of misinformation they don't understand. When they start to lean into it and start to understand as we try to communicate what this rig can do and how these two are amazing when they are in sync with each other and what process you need to have to do that, then they start to see the strength of that. And that's where that region will start to look at it because they'll start to see that. But there are places around the country that I'm like, oh, I'm excited when this state gets one because it'll make a big difference. To your point, when I help a department that's speccing a rig and I take them out to the Blue Forest or take them over to where tillers are being built, there'll be 6, 7 tillers out there. For me to be able to get them in and out of 7 different tillers under one roof is unbelievable because everything I say is one thing and I can show them pictures, but if I can show them sitting in the rig and all these nuances we're talking about, wow. And then when we come back and do pre-con and I walk through with them, they now understand that, or they go back to their apartment and they're getting ready for pre-con, they start building the rig. It's huge. And just to go into a plant to have 7 or 6 under
Sure.
one roof is just like amazing.
Yeah, well, it's another world. So I asked a similar question recently on why are we seeing this resurgence of tillers? Why are we seeing them in different areas? It's now so much easier with programs that you offer for people to now train on a tiller and closing that gap and kind of the fear, the anxiety around training on it. Can you talk a little bit about what they do or what you do in that space?
Yeah. Again, typically what you're doing in the old days is you would go to your closest fire department that had a tiller and you would ask them for their best person and they would come over and they'd show you what they knew. So you were getting the best of what they knew and you're also getting their bad habits, but you simply didn't know what you didn't know what you didn't know. So for me personally, I remember when I learned how to tiller and I had no idea what I was doing. And when the guys took me out of the street, I was freaked out, white knuckling it. I was scared, but I wasn't going to tell them anything. I'm a firefighter, so I'm going to fake it until I make it. Right. And figure it out. But I remember that first year, like going to some of the senior drivers and asking them, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? What is happening there? What's your thought process? And they all had different variations of how they were doing it. And what's interesting about our senior firefighters in the National Fire Service is as that firefighter is becoming good at any skill set, what they're not doing is they're not stopping and recording the mistakes they're making, and then the adjustments they made to that mistake, and then naming it and coming up with a term and a clear definition, and it's a concept. They never do that. So when you ask that old timer, how'd you do that? It's just kids, something you have to get in there and do kind of thing. And I love that thought process and why that happens in the National Fire Service, and that institutional knowledge just disappears when they retire. So for me, it was, how do I capture that? So if we could formalize this and make it so we clearly understand and define, what does the driver do? What does the tiller operator do? You could have a 26-year member, a 2-year member get in this rig, and they can get this rig humming down the road in sync. That's what you're looking for. And more importantly, we want to really teach them the why. Why would I do that? What's the value system that I would choose to drive this apparatus in this capacity? Well, I know if I do this, it helps and augments the driver or supports the tiller operator. And when we get into these situations, if I do this, we're going to do this cool whiz bang thing that's going to make this thing just fling around the corner and bend around the corner, and the excitement of that. And every firefighter wants to understand the why. They want to know what it is, and then they want to put it into practice. And so what we specialize in is coming in and doing that. And, we close the gap. We wanted to do that. That was my goal. That was my heart, my passion for that. And we're still always leaning forward, trying to figure out how to do that. And we've come up with a system that we can take the layperson and make him a very competent, good driver, and also consistent. And that's probably the most important thing that we want to do with a team, is make them consistent, because the problem is every fire department has multiple shifts, right? A, B, C, or even D. Each one of those shifts have different personalities, and those shifts take on that personality. And so you don't want A shift driving it a certain way and then C shift driving it a different way, because now A shift guy gets off and he's working overtime, and now these two are not in sync. They're not consistent. And that's where you see the rig get wonky. So we wanted to show people, like, if you do this, this is the repercussions. But if you drive this way, doesn't matter what shift you're on, doesn't matter what you're doing. This is our culture. We drive it this way because I understand the power of driving this way. Makes it safe and easy. And I'd also say too, the tiller gets a bad rap because historically people would say, if you're going to get a tiller, you're going to get an accident, right? It's the price of doing business when you got a TDA. And we reject that totally. And I understand where it comes from. So what we want to do is say, no, we want you to have ownership of this. So you feel confident, and you have the confidence, the competency to be able to drive this rig where you're not going to get in accidents. I'm very proud of departments that we've trained 12, 13 years, have never had a TDA accident, and they love it. They have the ownership of this. So when we leave, we want them to take over that and have their own culture within that process. And that's probably one of the funnest things to do, is kind of we hand off that torch and they take it, and they take it seriously.
Yeah, I mean, on behalf of all the people that work here at Pierce, we get to build a really special product, and it means a lot that, you're training people to get absolutely everything they can out of that piece of equipment, and that it's getting full service in the community, and being trained on that is just so critical. So tell me a little bit more. So if someone wants to learn more about TDAs, learn more about your training, where would you send them?
Yeah, they just go to the website. There's a little training tab up there. Click on that and they can contact me. I'll reach out to them, start asking questions, what their needs are. And I would say too, I like to help departments early on. Like, if you're thinking about getting a TA, let's have a conversation. I provide a presentation and do over Zoom, completely free, where we just kind of work through, should you get this rig or should you not get this rig? So what are the pros and cons for that? And then, we'll work into the training component of it, but obviously that's how when they get it. But they can reach me there. We've got the Facebook page and the Instagram page, where that's just a place for people to come together and have fun celebrating what this rig does. It's so fun. It's the old hook and ladder. And so being able to show people that in those, social media aspects, it's changed a lot as far as, I think, growth and how people look at that. That's a great place where people can reach out to, and people send me videos and pictures and I post them. And it's just fun to be able to show what people do and how excited they are and proud of that as well.
Well, Steve, thanks a ton. Really appreciate you jumping on here. I know that people talk a lot about the time in the fire service and always wanting to lead it better than they found it. And I think of you a lot when I think of people that do that. So thanks so much for doing it and for being such a great friend along the way.
I appreciate it, Dan. Nice to see you, man.